Well, good morning. Fred is home with a sick grandchild this morning, so hopefully she recovers quickly. I've been assigned to do the introduction this morning. For any of you who don't know me, I'm Ross Stout, I'm the Vice President. And Vice Presidents don't really get to do much, so I'm really excited today. I talked to a couple board members this morning. They said, well, you're going to have to do that today. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I thought, well, this is my opportunity for my 15 minutes of fame, you know. They said, no, you only get 2.5 minutes. And I said, well, do I at least have time to tell a joke? They said, well, okay, but it has to be clean, short, and funny. And I said, well, I'm not sure I know a joke that meets any of those criteria, much less all three, but I'll give it a try. So when does a joke become a dad joke? When the punchline becomes apparent. So that meet all three criteria? Well, welcome to our last session of February. We have a great presentation this morning. And so I will give all the normal warnings, like turn off your cell phones, please. And then we'll have questions after about a 45, 50-minute presentation, and then our speakers will come back for the second hour. So now Vicki is going to introduce our speakers.
This is a morning of fill-ins because unfortunately our sponsor, I know she's very, very heartbroken not to be able to be here, but is not here this morning. So I only have my magnifier, so I've got to read some of this material. Okay, we have two speakers today, Bob Horenstein and Rachel Nelson. Bob has served as Chief Community Relations and Public Affairs Officer for the Jewish Federation of Greater Portland since 1994. He's also a freelance writer who has earned several awards of excellence in journalism. Bob holds a master's degree in political science from Portland State University. Rachel Nelson is the Director of Educational Initiatives and Associate Director of Community Relations at the Jewish Federation of Greater Portland. She leads collaborative efforts with educational institutions and plays a key role in the Federation's relations initiatives. She holds a bachelor's degree in human services from the University of Oregon, as well as a master's degree in education with a focus on experiential education from American Jewish University. So please welcome our two speakers. They're going to be kind of team tagging for the presentations. And Neely's here, yay!
Thank you. I was going to start with a joke, but I can't top that joke, so no. So, are you going to be up here? Yeah. Well, you're going to speak as well. So, I thought we'd just start just a little bit about our organization and a little bit about the Jews of Oregon. There's a small Jewish community down here in Salem, but we'll talk about that in a moment. So the Jewish Federation of Greater Portland, which our catchment area actually comes all the way down to Salem. Okay, like this good? Okay, sorry. So the Jewish Federation of Greater Portland, it sounds so loud to me. The Jewish Federation of Greater Portland is the central philanthropic public affairs advocacy body of the Greater Portland Jewish community. And we do a lot of different things. I'm not going to dwell on everything we do. We raise about approximately $4 million a year, which we allocate out to different organizations, social service organizations, schools, and so on. We're involved with our Jewish Community Relations Council, which is a council made up of representatives from all of our congregations and other local Jewish organizations, so that we try to speak on behalf of the organized Jewish community on a range of issues. Anti-Semitism is just one of the issues that we've been unfortunately dealing with quite a bit lately, but we deal with a lot of different issues. For example, as I look over at the Capitol building, we have a lobbyist. We work on protecting the social safety net, climate change, gun safety. There's a lot of different issues that we're involved with, and oftentimes we work in coalitions with other faith communities or ethnic communities because we're relatively a small community, small relatively speaking, and it's better to work in strength in numbers where we have common cause. Unfortunately, over the last I would say the last 2.5 to 3 years, we have been spending a lot of our time addressing anti-Semitism, which is why this is such an important topic that we're talking about today. So we want to talk a little bit about who the Jews are of Oregon. I'll let Rachel talk about a study that we did a couple of years ago with Brandeis University. It was a demographic study that surprised us in terms of some of the numbers. So I'll let Rachel.
Yeah, so can you all hear me? Okay. So in the winter of 22-23, we did a first community study since 2008, but really the most comprehensive study we'd ever done of the Jewish community of Oregon, because we also included Eugene and Lane County in that study. And we had been working on the assumption that we had maybe 38,000 Jews living in the metropolitan area, which is southwest Washington, Clark County, all the way through here, Marion County. What we were surprised to find is there's actually 56,000 Jews living in the metropolitan area, but the majority of whom are tangentially connected to the Jewish community. They are very Jewish, strong in their identity, but not necessarily synagogue goers. They have their own communities. We found out about 50% of the community lives on the east side of Portland. And what we had traditionally, if you know the Portland makeup, many of our large organizations and institutions are in southwest Portland, but only 13% of our community lives there. Full 20% lives in the western suburbs, including the majority of those with young families, 0 to 18. And there is no if you look at traditional other older Jewish communities, there's a Jewish neighborhood, even still to this day, and we're not that way. The Jewish community is really spread out. So we think there's about 56,000 Jews in the metropolitan area and about 10,000 spread out through the rest of the state of Oregon, making up about just under 2% of the Portland metropolitan community and probably less than 1% of the overall state population.
So I'm going to start with this just to get the topic rolling. 2 years ago, some students at Cal Santa Cruz decided to have a birthday celebration. And they went out and they brought cakes, and it was April 20th. April 20th is the birthday of someone in history. Anyone want to guess who that might be? Hitler. Adolf Hitler. They were celebrating Hitler's birthday, and they had cakes decorated with Nazi symbols. Yes, you can't make these things up, right? Then let's talk about something that's been out there really troubling us for a long time. How many of you are familiar with Candace Owens? Okay. So Candace Owens, who's a commentator, podcaster. I want to just quote some of and I wrote them down just to make sure I didn't misquote her, but I could have a litany of her quotes that are very troublesome. I just want to read you a few of them. Jewish people were and these are direct quotes, Jewish people were in control of the transatlantic slave trade. Judaism is a pedophile-centric religion that believes in demons and child sacrifice. Elie Wiesel, the famous Holocaust survivor who wrote many books like Night, he was never in Auschwitz, according to Candace Owens, and the Nazi medical experiments is just a bunch of propaganda that never happened. The Star of David, the Jewish symbol, is a reference to, quote, occult sex magic. Okay? Anyone want to guess how many followers she has on Instagram? 6.5 million, 5.6 million YouTube subscribers. So this is a serious topic, and it's of great concern, obviously, to our community because it is being normalized. So next
And
slide.
I just quickly want to make, Bob, you heard Bob when he referred to the symbol that's used by, that was used by the Nazi community, the Nazi swastika. We use the term Nazi swastika. As Bob mentioned, we do a lot of work in interfaith settings, and we've had a long-running partnership with the Hindu community, and we learned a lot about the historical roots of the swastika, which is a sacred symbol in Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. And so we're very intentional about notating the difference between the symbols, so we refer to it as a Nazi swastika.
So today we're going to go through a lot of different things. We want to explain what anti-Semitism is because a fairly recent survey out of George Washington University of 10,000 individuals between the ages of 13 and 35 showed that a majority did not know what anti-Semitism is. And a lot of people have a difficulty defining exactly what it is. So we're going to talk about exactly what is it. We're going to talk about some misconceptions about Jewish identity that feed on the ignorance around anti-Semitism. We're going to explain why it is that too often professionals doing work in diversity, equity, inclusion dismiss anti-Semitism as a serious problem or ignore it completely. We're going to describe how it has evolved over time. I'm not talking about going back 2,000 years, but what did it look like, say, in my parents' generation? And then finally, we're going to talk about how it's being normalized on both ends of the political spectrum, which is the greatest concern that we have. So why is it overlooked? So first of all, go ahead. So many people in America don't understand who the Jews are. And I'm going to use the example, I don't mean to pick on any particular person, but Whoopi Goldberg, on The View, ABC's talk show The View, made some comments a couple of years ago that got her suspended by ABC. And she said in that the Holocaust was about white people doing it to white people. So this notion that Jews are simply a white religious community is wrong on several levels. And I'm going to explain why. There's the personal level, there is the historic level. Number one, okay, so you're looking at the two of us and you're looking at, well, your skin is white, right? I want you to know that growing up in Portland, when there were only maybe
10,000?
Maybe 10,000 Jews, I never felt part of the white Christian majority in the city of Portland. I always felt myself to be a minority. So I've always, and not only that, I've never identified myself by the color of my skin. Now, I understand because I'm white, this is the term I use, white presenting. I understand that I have privilege because of the color of my skin, and I own up to that, right? I'm not going to be pulled over by a police officer because of the color of my skin. I get that. I understand that. However, historically and for other reasons, demographically, it's not true. So when you think about the community, first of all, we're a people. We're a distinct people, and we were a people before we actually even had the religion itself, number one. Number two is that when you think of us only as a white community, it erases the identity of the majority of Jews worldwide who are what we would describe today as people of color. So for example, my wife, her family was from Shiraz in Iran, and now my wife from Israel, but Persian descent, her skin is decidedly not white, brown. In fact, we were just in Punta Cana and everyone thought she was from Punta Cana, right? We could be in an Arab country and everyone would start talking to her in Arabic. So because of the color of our skin. The majority of Jews in Israel, which is half the Jewish population of the world, is actually people of color. So we don't really identify by skin color. We don't think of ourselves as a race, but I will get back to that. Now, so that's one. Historically, we were never considered to be, in Europe, certainly, white. Okay? We were always despised as a non-white outsider. And even today, if you were to ask a white nationalist, do you think Jews are white? Of course, they don't believe that we are part of the white race. Okay? So for those reasons, we don't identify by the color of our skin, historically, demographically, and so on.
I'll just quickly add, I think a great person to read more about this is an author named Dara Horn, who talks about us as a tribe with permeable borders, because you can both be born into the Jewish community in many different ethnicities and peoplehoods, but you can also become part. So we are open and permeable in that way.
Okay, so anti-Semitism. The word itself is, I keep walking into that light and it's blinding me. The word itself is a misnomer, okay? Does anyone know where that term came from or when it was starting to be used? Any idea? Anyone want to guess? Is it a recent term? Is it going back centuries?
We encourage our audience participation.
Yes.
It's okay.
I can hear.
We can hear and we'll repeat it back out.
Yes. So the term came from a German politician, journalist, agitator by the name of Wilhelm Marr in 1879. Before that, okay, hatred of Jews was known as hatred of Jews. And why did he coin this phrase, anti-Semitism? Well, before that, okay, typically when we talk about anti-Semitism, like the anti-Semitism that was emanated from the Catholic Church, it was all about the way Jews worshiped. It was opposition to the way we worship, the fact that we didn't accept Jesus Christ as our Savior. That was the way it looked then. Well, Wilhelm Marr had a problem because he hated Jews, but what about Jews who converted to a different religion, right? What if they converted to Catholicism? They're still Jews in his mind.
And so this was after the Enlightenment, which is a key part of this as well.
So he had to come up with something else, and he wanted to introduce a racial component. So when you think about Semitic, there's really no such thing as Semitic people, even though there seems to be this misconception that there is. There are Semitic languages, but the term Semitic seems to apply to not just Jews, but also Arabs, right? People who lived or live in a certain area in the Middle East, in the Levant, in that area there. And so, but it doesn't mean anti-Arab hate. It means anti-Jewish hate, right? So he wanted to introduce this racial component, and he was successful in doing that. And if you think about it, it ultimately culminated in the Holocaust, where the Nazis regarded Jews as a race, a subhuman race, right? Even though we don't consider ourselves to be a race because we're made up of many different races. So the term itself isn't really, I mean, really the right term is hatred of Jews. That's what we're talking about today. People don't understand.
Do you want me to go back one?
That's right. How anti-Semitism works. Because if you can show both of them. Because if you see us as a white community, okay, what are some of the attributes that people associate with being white? Just shout them out. Privilege, we talked about. What else? Skin color. Well, right.
Presentation.
What was that? Majority. Okay. And what about attributes, like character? Like what? When you think of white, you think of what? Success, power, affluence. Okay, right? We're part of the oppressor class if we are part of the white class in America. That's how we're perceived, right? So when we say that we're vulnerable because of anti-Semitism, rising anti-Semitism, our viewpoint is less trusted because people see us that way. Well, how can you be vulnerable if you're, By the way, this notion that Jews are all affluent, in our study, it showed that in the greater Portland area, 26% of Jews are living paycheck to paycheck or living in poverty. So this notion, we're just like, unfortunately, like other communities. So we're less trusted in that sense. But there's also this notion that, look, and we're not here to compare ourselves with the tragedies or tragic histories of other people. Okay, that's not, in America, up until recently, certainly, Jews have done fairly well. We've been assimilated, we've been, relatively well educated, those kinds of things. But anti-Semitism works in cycles. So, for example, in Europe, where communities first welcomed Jews, but if you looked at the history over the centuries, in every single community where Jews lived in Europe, they were eventually murdered, certainly persecuted, forced to convert to a different religion, or expelled. In every single case. My family lived in Poland, started living in Poland in the 1500s, when Poland welcomed Jews. And we know what happened 4.5 centuries later when 90% of Polish Jewry was murdered during the Holocaust. And if you think about the Jews of Germany, okay, in the 1920s, they were well assimilated. They were well represented in the professions, in law, in medicine, in government. German Jewish men had served honorably in the army during World War I. 20 years later, they were sent in boxcars to their deaths. So there is this cycle throughout history, unfortunately, that has played out over and over again. That's why when we say we're vulnerable, it's sort of in our DNA, because if we understand our history, we know we never feel entirely safe.
So I'll share a little bit about that. My family has roots in Italy from the 1500s, and my great-grandfather worked on the Suez Canal. He was part of the Italian military, and in 1943, my grandmother and her family had to escape in the middle of the night under train tracks into Switzerland. Her grandfather wasn't able to come and was killed. And we had about 10 members of our family that were annihilated in Auschwitz.
Okay, so you look at this photo and you say, no, those aren't Jews. Well, actually, all of them are, right? So when we talk about, you can't just define us by our skin color, by being white. It's a misconception, and all of these folks here are Jews.
So about 15% of the U.S. Jewish community identifies as people of color, and in Portland, it's about 7 to 10% that identify as Jews of color.
Next. So let's talk about another piece of identity. The word Zionism, it gets thrown around a lot. It's been made to be sort of a dirty word. It's been corrupted. Now, Zionism can be thought of as a political viewpoint, right? Some people would identify Zionism as being opposed to the Israeli state or the Israeli government. Right? Anti-Zionism, that they were seeing it through a political lens. Certainly, a Palestinian would identify it as something to be opposed. But I'm going to read this quote because I think it's important, because Zionism is more than political. It's part of Jewish identity for the majority of Jews worldwide. And I'm going to read this in case you can't see it well. Zionism, this is from a rabbi in New York City, a well-known rabbi. Zionism, Israel, Jewish self-determination. These are not political preferences or partisan talking points. They are constituent building blocks and inseparable strands of my Jewish identity. To accept me as a Jew, but to ask me to check my concern for the people and state of Israel at the door is a nonsensical proposition and an offensive one, no different than asking me to reject God, Torah, mitzvot, or good deeds, or any other pillar of my faith. So what he's talking about here is that Zionism is what it means in its core belief is support for the right of the Jewish people to self-determination in a part of our ancestral homeland. It does not negate the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination. I want to make that clear. And we're not here to talk about the conflict that's happening in Israel and Gaza. That's not, and you wouldn't necessarily even know what my views are about that anyway. But what I'm telling you is that when I talk about my Jewish identity, okay, part of it is that yearning for return to our homeland. Doesn't mean we're all going to move to Israel. That's not what it's about. But it does mean that when we read our daily prayers, which we recite 3 times a day, that yearning for return to our ancestral homeland is embedded in our prayers. When we pray, we face here, we face east because we face Jerusalem. In Passover, which we're going to celebrate, at the end, we talk about wanting to be in Jerusalem next year.
If you look at the holiday season, it's an agricultural holiday season based on the seasons in Israel. So we just observed the holiday of Tu B'Shvat, which here is known as the birthday of the trees, but it's because in Israel, in February, that's when the almond trees are blossoming. If you look at our 3 pilgrimage festivals that happen, they are all tied with the harvest and the planting in the seasons of Israel.
Unfortunately, a lot of people identify Zionism with support for the Israeli government or Israeli government policy. That's not what it is. It is part, as he put it, part of our Jewish identity, and that's true for the vast majority of Jews worldwide. Doesn't mean that every Jew feels that way. We understand that. But since it's been corrupted, there's a lot of confusion about what it means. So we're going to talk about later on are people who, like me, who identify Zionism as part of our Judaism, our religion, and our culture, that we're being discriminated against, and that's where it crosses a line into anti-Semitism. Go ahead. So Eric Ward, you may have heard of Eric. He used to be the executive director of Western State Center, which was it's a pro-democracy organization based in Portland. He recently spoke in Portland. He's now with Race Forward. And again, I think this is just an important point to make. I am a black, non-Jewish man, but I am here because anti-Semitism is real. It is not a metaphor, nor a talking point. It is not something to be explained away as sheer politics or dismissed as just rhetoric. Anti-Semitism is a living, adaptive nature. It mutates, it recruits, it hides behind intellectual costumes. It moves through conspiracies, scapegoating, the seduction of common sense, and when it finds daylight, it never stops with the Jews, and that's an important point. He wrote an article called Skin in the Game.
You can find it on Medium if you just Google Skin in the Game, Eric Ward.
Skin in the Game, because his point being we cannot end racism if we ignore anti-Semitism. They are connected, and we're going to talk a little bit about how they are connected. And that's something I want to make really clear, that our organization, we believe that when anyone, any minority, whether it's person of colors or LGBTQ or anyone who is attacked because of their identity, that's an attack on all of us. And so we have this quote from a Lutheran minister, famous quote during the Holocaust, when he talked about, well, I didn't speak up when they came for the communists because I wasn't communist. I didn't speak up for the Jews because I wasn't Jewish. I didn't speak up for the Catholics because I wasn't Catholic. When they came for me, there was no one left to speak up for me. So that is really our philosophy. Okay, so let's talk about what did it used to look like. My own personal experience with anti-Semitism in Portland, I didn't have too many experiences, but I do remember in 6th grade when I was playing at recess, we were playing basketball, and there was a kid who I had been a classmate of since kindergarten, blonde hair, blue eyes. I didn't say we were friends, but we were friendly. And we were playing basketball, and we were going for a loose ball, and we ran into each other, and we knocked each other down. And when we got up, he looked at me, stared me down, and called me a dirty Jew. I was shocked, and it has stayed with me ever since. Okay? I remember when it happened, where it happened, and who did it. It stayed with me all that time. When I was in Reno about 20 years ago, killing some time, I went to an Oregon football game. Go Oregon, yeah, go Ducks. And they were playing Nevada and killing some time at the hotel. The casino was playing a little bit of blackjack. And those were the days when you can actually put down a $3 bet. And I won a blackjack. And the dealer looked at me and said, "Oh, good job. You won a Jewish blackjack." I wasn't sure I heard her right. I said, "What did you say?" And she repeated herself. Jewish blackjack? Because what, I'm cheap? What? I mean, I hope that was the last time she ever used that, because I educated her about it. But, those were little minor incidents compared to what we've experienced today. You want to mention?
Sure. I'll just share a couple. I also grew up in the Portland metro area. A couple of things that came up a lot: holiday observances, outdoor school, or things, the first day of school happening on Jewish holidays with no recognition. And thankfully, we've come a long way with working on that. My junior year of high school in Beaverton, I was sitting in a history class. We had our one paragraph on the Holocaust. And a girl turned to the teacher and said, "Well, I wish Hitler had just finished the job." Nobody ever said anything. Out on vacation in Eastern Oregon with a boyfriend at the time, and his friends came over to meet me, and, "Where are your horns?" So this wasn't, it was a while ago, but not so long ago.
Yes. So the way it looks today is not the way it looked, say, even in my parents' generation. So my dad grew up in the 1920s, and the way he experienced it, thankfully, is different. So, for example, I don't know how many of you have lived in Portland or been to Portland. So there's a Jewish community center. Why do we have a Jewish community center? Well, because, it wasn't until 1958 when the Multnomah Athletic Club started allowing Jewish members. And then it took another 11 years for the University Club and the Arlington Club in Portland to allow Jews. I spoke at the Arlington Club last year on antisemitism. How ironic was that, right? Given its history. There were, by the way, again, if you've been to Portland, there's the Tualatin Country Club. It was built by Jews. Why? Because we weren't allowed in other golf clubs like Waverly or Portland Golf Club, which was just 3 miles down the road. In my lifetime, there was a time when they did not allow Jewish members. And look, there were other things going on too during his lifetime. There were quotas. For example, during the Holocaust, when Jews were desperate to get out of Europe, the State Department, the U.S. State Department, did everything to make it impossible, almost impossible, for Jewish refugees to come to this country.
Including sending ships back that made it to America.
Yes, well, that was the president who did that. And look, there were also, Father Coughlin, who had a radio show, and when radio was relatively new, and would spread his vitriol through the airwaves.
It's a great podcast by Rachel Maddow on Father Coughlin.
And Henry Ford, who had his own newspaper, a virulent anti-Semite. So those things, pretty much are gone, thankfully, and it looks very different today. So we're going to talk about this. Rachel's going to be talking about anti-Semitism on the far right. I will be talking about it on the far left. And there's always the question about protests. Are they anti-Semitic? We're going to get into all of that. If you're not familiar, this is supposedly an Israeli flag which would have a Star of David. Instead, it has a Nazi swastika dripping in blood. And then on the right, does anyone recognize the photo on the right? What's the photo on the right? Charlottesville, Unite the Right, 2017. Right? And if you look at these folks here, now they were chanting something, which we'll get to in a second, but if you look at them, if you take away the tiki torches and the Heil Hitler salute, they kind of look normal, right? They don't look like the skinheads that I remember in Portland with the jack boots and the black jackets, leather jackets. That's not what these guys look like. That's very deliberate because they want to be seen as part of the mainstream. But they were chanting something, okay? Jews shall not replace us. Jews shall not replace us. What does that mean? Well, anti-Semitism at its most fundamental level is a conspiracy theory, right? And in this case, Jews, by the way, we are maybe 2% of the American population, right? Anyone know how many Jews there are in the world?
Throw out a guess.
Take a guess.
Yeah, we have teens ask this in the high school
There's
program.
like 8 billion people. How many Jews are there? Anyone want to get? How many? 13 million?
What do you think the percentage is? 5%, 3%? Less than 5? It is 0.2%.
We are maybe 16 million worldwide, okay? But we have a lot of power, right? Because we're Jews, right? We control the weather, we'll get into all that. So, but Jews shall not replace us is this conspiracy theory that Jews are orchestrating this campaign threatening the white ethno-state of America. How are we doing that? We're bringing in people from outside of America, people of color, to threaten the white majority in this country.
We'll talk about that more
Okay?
coming
Next.
up.
So the Anti-Defamation League does these studies, these 3-year studies about Jewish tropes, and you would be maybe surprised to hear what they have found. So this is 22 to 24, so they don't have the most recent study. So nearly a quarter believe, out of the 11 anti-Jewish tropes, nearly a quarter believe a majority of them. And at least 85% of Americans believe at least one anti-Jewish trope. Nearly half believe Jews are more loyal to the state of Israel. That's the dual loyalty charge that we have heard from the highest levels of our government. Over a third believe Jews don't share the values of the rest of America. A quarter believe Jews have too much power in the business world. Almost a quarter believe Jews don't care about anyone but themselves. And nearly a quarter believe that Jews are willing to use shady practices to get what we want, whatever that may be. Go ahead. So just look at some of these quotes. Kill all the Jews, right, after a Heil Hitler salute. And you'll see the rest of these quotes, denigrating LGBTQ or Mexican or black, okay? Linda stole because she's black. You're a border hopper. You probably eat a lot of beans and tacos. You want to know who said these things? Go ahead, Rachel.
Nope,
Oops.
it doesn't have it on there.
Oh, it doesn't have it.
You took it off.
These are quotes from an elementary school in Portland. That first quote was 3 boys who accosted a Jewish girl, 9 years old. They were all 9 years old. When the vice principal asked, where did this come from? Well, during COVID, they probably were watching a lot of things online, and they were watching South Park.
They were watching TikToks of South Park, so 30-second shorts, not even the full episode.
Okay, next. So just some examples before we get to Rachel and right-wing anti-Semitism. So this was, our largest congregation was vandalized with die Juden, die Jews. The person who did this, by the way, also vandalized our East Side Jewish Commons building and a Muslim center on the east side of Portland. So, equal opportunity hater. There's one. This is an Applebee. Okay, Jews work here. And I won't use the language, F the Jews. Okay. Then there's, him. Yeah, Kanye or Ye. So, he has been very active in hateful rhetoric. Now, he recently apologized for at least the 3rd time now, I think.
Just before his most recent
any
album.
Jewish person that does business with me needs to know I don't like or trust any Jewish person, and this is completely sober with no Hennessy, no alcohol. I'm never apologizing for my Jewish comments, right? Well, okay. and he has more followers than there are Jews on the planet. Okay? And you never know, it just takes one to be incited, right? Go ahead. Yeah, so this photo of Elon Musk, I think, speaks for itself. On the right, Tucker Carlson, he's been in the news a lot lately, and he has quite a following, especially from young Republicans, young, like below the age of 44. In fact, 45% of young Republicans believe that Jews are a threat to the American way of life. That's a recent survey. And it's people like Tucker Carlson who are spreading that sort of vicious conspiracy theory. Here he's interviewing Daryl Cooper, who is a notorious Holocaust denier. He's also interviewed Nick Fuentes. We're going to get to him. Nick Fuentes is another neo-Nazi Holocaust denier. So he's been in bed with a lot of these far-right anti-Semites. This photo appeared in the New York Times back in 2019. And if you're not familiar with what you're seeing here, this dog that's leading President Trump around, a blind President Trump, you can see it's someone who's Jewish because it has the Star of David, but if you're not familiar, that's the face of Benjamin Netanyahu, who is the current Prime Minister of Israel. And and by the way, Trump is not only blind, but he has a yarmulke on, okay? And it's in color. How could you miss it, right? The trope here is that Jews control American foreign policy, right? Or Israel controls American foreign policy. The New York Times apologized for this, and in the apology it said that it had become numb to anti-Semitism. Next. Okay, Rachel.
Okay, so let's move on to some data. I'm good with this. I'll just stay here. So let's move on to some data. So the FBI reports hate crimes every year. They're also very slow. They usually release them in the summer for the year before. So we have stats from 2023 and 2024. We know that hate crimes are vastly underreported across all sectors. So what's listed here is not anywhere near what is necessarily happening. But we can see that of religiously motivated hate crimes, the majority are targeting Jews and or Jewish institutions. From 2022 to 2024, there was a 64% increase in incidents, religiously motivated hate crimes against the Jewish community or Jewish institutions. And we can drill down a little bit deeper to the Oregon Department of Justice. They have a bias response hotline, and this is the data from 2024. They also are very slow with releasing. And while we've seen a little bit of a decrease from 23 to 24, and most of the increase we saw in 23 was in the latter half, the final quarter of 23 after October 7th, but you can still see that Jewish Oregonians are experiencing 56% of the hate reports are against the Jewish community. I don't think it's in this slide, but we've read that of the 400 plus calls, the calls 400 to the next are calling against the Jewish, with reports of hate against the Jewish community. The next highest reported is less than 100. So just a little bit of context there. Let's talk about, and Bob mentioned this conspiracy theory of Jews puppeteering migration. So Tree of Life shooting happened on October 27th in 2018. The Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, where I actually lost two cousins of my cousins were praying at that synagogue when they were murdered by a white supremacist who broke into the building where there were multiple prayer services happening. Does anybody know why he picked that specific congregation? So he picked that specific congregation because they had partnered recently with an organization called HIAS, which is the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. HIAS helps to bring immigrants from a variety of countries, not just Jewish, and had most recently been helping to bring in Syrian Christians and Muslims escaping the civil war. And this synagogue had co-sponsored a Shabbat dinner with them and had been doing work promoting immigration. And he fed into that conspiracy theory of Jews shall not replace us, and came in and shot up the synagogue. So that's, that's hard. And then how is this being mainstreamed? Well, we talked about this guy. Anybody know who it is? Bob mentioned him a minute ago. Nick Fuentes. So he has been a guest at Mar-a-Lago with Ye, another good friend of ours that we talked about earlier. He blames Jews for it taking so long for Roe v. Wade to be overturned in the Supreme Court. He also has had former Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, and I don't know if Paul Gosar is still in Congress. But he's had them at his America First Political Action Committee conference in February of 2022. He's been a guest, and he is regularly featured on Tucker Carlson. So it's troubling that he is not only having a relationship, an ongoing relationship with our president, but he has also a close relationship with other Republicans, members of Congress who've spoken at his conferences. So we have people who are in our government who are regularly associating with white nationalists.
Yeah, I just want to go back to that for a second. I just want to make sure you can see that quote. I mean, just to see, he's an equal opportunity hater. Jews are running society. Blacks need to be imprisoned, and we would live in paradise, right? So he is someone who is now come out of the margins of society and is out in the open. And he was a guest of our president at Mar-a-Lago. So this is very concerning about how it's being normalized, even on the far right.
So just another example of this is, and I hadn't heard of this guy because I'm not part of his target audience, but this is a podcaster named Myron Gaines, and he co-hosts a podcast called the Fresh and Fit Podcast, which prepackages toxic masculinity and offers it up as self-improvement. He preaches basically men's innate superiority over women, and that it's their role to dominate women. He's also, since 2023, been increasingly embracing anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish hate and bias. He, as you can see, he is a black man, but he sees himself as a white nationalist ally. And you can see, yeah, we like Hitler, regularly interacting with, and you can see is over 1.5 million YouTube subscribers. A lot of them are this kind of younger male generation that we were talking about earlier. There's this guy, Fritz Bergeron. He, a U.S. State Department mid-level foreign service employee for many years, under many presidents, including Biden. And he was moonlighting as an anti-Semitic blogger. Jesus Christ came to save the world from the Jews, they who are the seed of the serpent. Jewish ideas poison people. So this was his ongoing rhetoric on his social media accounts and his blog. There were multiple reports and complaints from other colleagues saying this guy shouldn't be working here, and yet he remained employed year after year, president after president. He did do it on his own time, but does it really matter if he's doing it on his own time, if this is what he's saying? You can see another example of his website, and he is no longer employed. He was most recently listed as part of the retirement list from the State Department, but he did go on his blog to tell us that the Jews got him fired.
So just keep in mind, this is someone who is representing our government, the federal government, in foreign service. And that's, again, another way how it's being normalized, even on the far right.
So I'm wondering if this is a good opportunity for the break, and then we'll transition over to the second part, because it's about 10 to 11 right now.
And we'll hold the questions until the end of the presentation. We'll make sure we have at least 15 minutes for that.
Hi. So I think it may have been mentioned, I'm the one who invited our amazing guests to speak to you about anti-Semitism. When I did that, that was the fall of last year when the Gaza and Israeli war was raging, and so were anti-Semitic and anti-Israel sentiment. But that wasn't the reason that triggered my reach out to Bob and Rachel, because when that was going on, I started paying a lot of attention to my community, and I thought I've never encountered overt anti-Semitism. And remember, I'm the one who went to an all-girls Catholic college. Never encountered directly anti-Semitism. So I started to pay attention. And I noticed that people I like very much and respect and very friendly with were sometimes making comments like, oh yeah, the Jews were controlling the media. And that really scared me and spoke to the normalization of anti-Semitism in American society. So when that happened, that's when I said, okay, I want to make sure we reach out to this community and at least educate us about what's going on. So I'm going to hand it back to the guys here.
Thank you. Okay. Sorry, I'm starting to lose my voice a little bit. So, now we're going to talk about anti-Semitism on the far left, which, yes, it's conflated with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. However, I'm not here to talk about the conflict, okay? You will not know my views about what's going on in Israel unless I tell you, afterwards, because that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about how this is manifesting. When we talk about anti-Zionism, is it political? Is it anti-Semitism? We're going to give you some what others have said about anti-Zionism, and you can make up your own mind. But we're here to show you how those of us who believe that Zionism is part of our Jewish identity are being harassed, discriminated against, excluded, okay? And so when you see this, often, I know there are a lot of people in our community who look at that and say, anti-Semitism. So let me just explain this boycott movement, which is a global movement. It has local, I want to say chapters, but local coalitions. It stands for boycott, divest, and sanctions. Okay, now I don't want to get too political here. I'm just going to explain what this is. So boycott Israel, boycott Israeli scholars, prevent them from speaking at academic conferences, make sure that American entertainers are pressured into not being able to perform in Israel. Boycott Israeli products. So boycott a store that sells Israeli products. You get the idea. Divest, B. So B, boycott. D is divest. Divest from companies operating in Israel, whether they are Israeli companies or American companies that operate in Israel. And then sanction Israel. So that's the movement. And the question always is it anti-Semitic or is it just political? Okay, it's just expressing a political view against the Israeli government or Israeli policies. Fair, okay? And I will say this, and I'll be very clear. If you ask me, do I believe that anyone who supports this movement is an anti-Semite? The answer is not necessarily, okay? And when we talk about anti-Semitism on the far left as opposed to the far right, the intention is to harm and the impact is harmful. On the far left, the intention may not be to harm, but oftentimes the impact is harmful, okay? And I will say this, criticism of Israel, okay? Criticism of Israel, the only Jewish state in the world. Compare that with the number of Islamic states. There are 57 Muslim majority states. There's one Jewish majority state, which is Israel. Criticism of Israel in the sense of criticizing any government, including our own, is not anti-Semitism. Okay, I can't be clearer than that. In fact, if you want to see critics of the Israeli government, go to Israel. Read the Israeli media. Okay? Look at all of the protests that have been happening over the last 3 years, even before October 7th, 2023, the Hamas massacre that took place. Even before that, tens of thousands of Israelis were protesting in the streets. Okay? Criticism of Israel, of the Israeli government, is a national pastime in Israel. Okay? So keep that in mind. Okay, so the United Nations, not necessarily a friend of Israel, but they came out with a report in 2019 in which they said, okay, this is their, this is a special rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief, combating anti-Semitism to eliminate discrimination and intolerance based on religion and belief. And they said, not me, they said the objectives, activities, and effects of that movement, of the BDS movement, are, in their words, fundamentally anti-Semitic. Okay, next. So we're going to show you, how is this being normalized? Okay, take a good look at this. So what you see here are two city council members. There was...
Portland City Council.
Yeah, sorry, Portland City Council members. And the woman at the top was at this time, the president, and she's Jewish. And the person at the bottom is a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, who is now the president. But there was an election going on, and this showed up on social media. So when talking about the Jewish then president, a committed Zionist, like in her name, sitting in the president's seat is the biggest barrier to a truly progressive city agenda. And on the bottom, with Mr. Canal here, there is, it doesn't even talk about city issues, it talks about support for the Palestinian cause, and it has a heart with the Palestinian flag. So again, not to be political, it's not about the conflict, it's about, look at how they're characterizing this one Jewish member of the city council.
Who never posted anything about Israel or talked about Israel in any of her platforms. It was all about the city of Portland and what was happening in the city of Portland.
Okay, next. Okay, so the litmus test. Jews happen to be typically very progressive-minded. In fact, probably, in a typical, certainly a typical presidential election, you'll usually see somewhere between 70 and 75% of Jews voting Democratic, right? And we're involved in a lot of progressive causes. That could be reproductive choice, that could be LGBTQ rights, that could be climate change, gun safety, what have you, right? This is typical. But what we're finding is that in a lot of progressive spaces, we're now being excluded. Okay, so here are some examples. So again, here is where it is crossing the line into anti-Semitism. So this is probably the most salient example that I can come up with. Back in, now it's 9 years ago, there was a march in Chicago in favor of LGBTQ rights, and there were 3 Jewish women who wanted to participate, and they were carrying that flag with the rainbow colors of the movement, and it had a Star of David, the Jewish symbol, in the middle, and they were kicked out. Why? They refused to disavow Israel. More specifically, they refused to disavow their Zionist identity, Zionism as part of their Jewish identity. And they were told by the organizers, the women were told that the march was explicitly anti-Zionist, and that if they were not okay with that, they should leave, because Zionism, okay, in the words of the organizers, is an inherently white supremacist ideology. Does anyone not think that Jews are the main target of white supremacists? And here we're being called white supremacists.
And I'll just add, this past summer, Two, in both Austin and in San Diego, the Jewish community was excluded from Pride and Pride celebrations because of anti-Israel and anti-Jewish sentiment. So it is still happening. This was 2017. Summer of 2025, 2 Jewish community. Actually, I think 3. I think there was a Canadian one as well. Yep.
Next. So here's an example. This is Guernica is a popular literary magazine, and it just so happened that an Israeli author submitted an article about her feelings about what was happening at the time after the Hamas attack and during the war in Gaza. And it was, you wouldn't have labeled it right-wing or anything like that. And they published it until there was a protest by some of the staff only because of national origin, because she was an Israeli. So they retracted the article and apologized for ever even printing it in the first place. And this Sarah Yael Hirschhorn from Northwestern University commented this was a virtual burning of books and bare-knuckled anti-Semitism.
And I'll give another example of a book issue. 2 summers ago in Chicago, there was a popular romance called Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, which was written by a Korean Jewish author. Never said a word about her. There was a Jewish character, an Israeli character in the book. He was actually not a really well-liked character. She was supposed to be in a book club vote in Chicago, and the independent bookstore immediately removed the book from the book club list. And in leaked emails from the assistant manager said he could not support any author that had any kind of Jewish Israeli identity.
Okay, some more examples. Here's an employee explaining why, once this bagel shop changed owners, that this employee could not work for the new owner because my own core beliefs do not allow me to work for a Zionist. I cannot allow my creativity and work to be associated with Zionism when this is something I vehemently reject.
There's currently a bakery chain in New York called Bread Bakery, and their workers are unionizing right now, and one of the requests of the Israeli owners is that they disavow their country of origin as part of the union
negotiations. And I will also
negotiations.
mention that we've had several Jewish-owned or Israeli-owned businesses in Portland that have been targeted with anti-Semitism. Go ahead. So here's one. Anti-Zionist tomatoes and cucumbers. Organizers of this community garden in Queens are requiring their members to be anti-Zionists. So again, the litmus test. How we are being discriminated against. This is blatant anti-Semitism. It's not political, it's anti-Semitism. Go ahead.
And not new. When I lived in Brooklyn in 2010, I wanted to join the Brooklyn Co-op, and I had to not be a Zionist. So I did not join the Brooklyn Co-op.
Okay, let's talk about healthcare. There has been a dramatic rise of anti-Semitism in healthcare. I want to, before we get to this, I want to read you some examples. In Portland, there was a nurse at the Oregon Health Sciences University, and again, you cannot make this up, who on social media actually posted that she would not treat Jewish people, whom she referred to as rats, dogs, and vermin. Now, she was fired after an outcry from our community. She was fired, but in November, she had her license renewed to practice for 2 more years. The Association of Jewish Psychologists applied to be recognized by their professional association, the American Psychological Association, APA. They wanted to be an official ethnic group, recognized as such, as other groups were recognized, and they were denied. In the memo, in response to their request, it claimed that Jews are, quote, too white, too privileged, and not victimized enough in the United States, thus taking away resources from people of color. They're applying again. We'll see what happens coming up here. In Chicago, there was a blacklist of Jewish therapists or therapists with Jewish-sounding names, okay, that was on Facebook. There was a whole Facebook account for this blacklist, urging colleagues not to refer clients to those Jews. The person who started it was reprimanded by the Illinois Licensing Board, but she had her license renewed for 2 more years as well. And then we heard the account of a medical student that posted publicly every time he draws blood from someone perceived to be a quote-unquote Zionist, he purposely misses the first time. The fact that he would post something like that and think that it was okay should tell us something, okay? So now we have this individual who is a decorated pediatrician, was just given an award by the American Academy of Pediatrics in Jacksonville, Florida. But he's been posting at night things like Zionism. Again, you're talking about my identity, our identity. Zionism is the root of all evil. We pray for the disappearance of Zionism in Israel. So, you know, believe it or not, there are concerns that we hear from individuals in our community. I just heard one yesterday. Going to a hospital and being treated, am I going to be targeted because I'm Jewish? When I'm asked, when I fill out the paperwork, should I mention that I'm Jewish? Is that going to be a problem? I've never heard of such a thing until the last couple of years.
So I have a 3.5-year-old who has had quite a number of hospitalizations. As Bob knows, he's fine right now, but he broke his femur a couple of years ago. That was a whole thing. We didn't put it away. Oh, the water bottle needs to stay down because they can't see my face. We didn't post, or we didn't publicly say that he was Jewish, and we just said that we had the resources because we didn't know what was going to be happening at that hospital.
Next. Okay, so this is the president of the American Psychological Association, the Society of Psychoanalysis and Psychoanalytic Psychology. Okay, and you can see what she said about us. Okay, I'm not Israeli, but my wife is, and I'm a Zionist, and we're all a bunch of genocidal, you know what, okay? So thankfully, there were well over 3,000 mental health professionals who demanded accountability from the American Psychological Association. I don't really know any updates about her status, but again, that she had no issue saying these things, no problem. Go ahead. So then we get into the education field, and we have been, last year in particular, but it's still continuing, literally every week, not an exaggeration, every week we would get a call from a Jewish parent, a Jewish teacher, maybe occasionally a Jewish student, about some sort of anti-Semitic incident in one of our public K-12 schools. It was overwhelming. So in the education field, this is concerning, very concerning. We had in Portland, the Portland Association of Teachers, putting out material that was just, there's no other way to put it, blatantly anti-Semitic. And here, this is the Massachusetts Association of Teachers. This was on their website. Okay, so take a look at some of these things here. You can say, oh, this is political, but first of all, these are teachers. Are we teaching our kids to think critically, or are we indoctrinating them, right? So you can see up on the corner, Zionists F off, right? There's a lot of photos of what appeared to be, you know, Hamas resistance. But then there's the Star of David. Did you catch that? With the $, right? Because Jews only care about money, right? And this was available on their website. No hesitation. It has since been removed. Next.
They actually had a hearing within the House of Representatives in Massachusetts that I learned at the FedPro, that there was an accounting taken for the MT in the Massachusetts Teachers Association.
So we have seen the attempt by an organization to introduce into our classrooms what could only be described as propaganda. Now, it's anti-Israel propaganda, but it often crosses a line into anti-Semitism. So, for example, this comes right out of a book called Teaching Palestine. You want to teach about what's happening in current events? I have no issue with that. But this is a book you can buy on Amazon, and it's being introduced at teacher conferences in the Pacific Northwest. And I want you to see this cartoon here, because you have the Israeli soldier stepping on the neck of what appears to be a Palestinian, an Arab, blood coming from his face, and God promised us this land. Okay? Zionism is an attempt to justify killing people and stealing their land, just like Manifest Destiny was in the United States. Hence on the right side with the individual here stepping on the throat of an indigenous American.
This was blown up poster size in a professional development that was done in my kids' school district's teachers union office.
Okay. This young lady was the vice president of the student government at USC until she wasn't, because there was an online campaign, in her words, to impeach my Zionist ass. Sorry for the language, okay? And why? It wasn't because, as she explains, it wasn't because she was a member of the LGBTQ community. It wasn't because she was a woman. It was because she identified as a Zionist. In her words, just simply supporting Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. And I could show you dozens of these kinds of incidents. Go ahead. This young lady was elected by her student body to give the commencement speech at City University of New York a couple of years ago. What she said in her speech was described by the university as hate speech. Go ahead. And here's an example that she tweeted back a couple years before her commencement speech. May every Zionist, talking about me, burn in the hottest pit of hell. That did not prevent her fellow students from believing she was qualified to give the commencement speech. No matter if there were Jewish students that were graduating, didn't matter. University of Berkeley has in their law school over 100 different student groups, but a couple of years ago, 23 of them voted to change their bylaws so that they could never invite a Zionist or a Jew who supports Israel to speak before them, which meant that at the time, Ruth Bader Ginsburg couldn't have spoken to them because she's a self-identified Zionist, or was, and the dean of the law school could not speak to them because of this change in their bylaws. So again, we're showing you how even on the far left, this is creeping into the mainstream. Go ahead. Sophie Fisher, this was a New York Times article, so it's also happening in the social realm. So she talked about at Barnard College how she's been ostracized by her freshman year roommate, by her big sister in her sorority, only because of what she describes as her Zionist identity. So what I'm trying to show you are those ways where anti-Zionism is crossing the line into anti-Semitism by harassing, intimidating, assaulting, excluding those of us who identify in this way.
So I run a program in Portland for the metro area called Student to Student, where we train teens to go speak about both the joys of being Jewish and anti-Semitism. It's an initiative we launched a couple of years ago. In our training that we do at the beginning of every year, the first question I ask our teens, they're all juniors and seniors in high school, how many of you have experienced anti-Jewish hate and bias from classmates, teachers, or other social settings? Every single one of them, every year, raises their hand that they have had experiences.
In fact, actually about 40% of American Jews have done something to change something to hide their Jewish identity, whether that's what they wear or where they go or what they say, okay? because they are afraid. I mean, we know of many college students who will not wear a necklace with a Star of David because they're afraid they will be harassed on campus.
And not just college students. We have high
Not
school
just college.
students who no longer identify and will not say that they are Jewish. They just want to get through the day at school.
Next. Okay, so the University of California Board of Regents issued their statement of principles against intolerance. I want you to look at this paragraph. They say, anti-Semitism, including anti-Semitic forms of anti-Zionism, have no place on their campuses. When you read that, are they saying, I'm going to ask this, are they saying that anti-Zionism is inherently anti-Semitic? Yes or no? Louder. No. No. Okay, they're talking about anti-Semitic forms of anti-Zionism. However, next, they do say that opposition to Zionism often is expressed in ways that are not simply statements of a disagreement over politics. Okay? We can have debates about what's happening in Israel and Gaza. We can debate about, is it a genocide, is it not a genocide? And we can have a civil debate about that. Okay? But what they're talking about here, it's also assertions of prejudice and intolerance toward Jewish people and culture. Okay? Next. Bet you didn't know he had anything to say about it. Now so he was at a dinner near Harvard where a student approached him and said something to which he responded. Again, this is what he said. Doesn't mean you agree with it or I agree with it. When people criticize Zionists, they mean Jews. You are talking anti-Semitism. So he was rebuking this student who, I can't remember exactly what the student said, but he believed that anti-Zionism was inherently anti-Semitism, right? So I'm just giving you different examples of what others have said about it. That was in 1967, a year before he was assassinated. Okay, so I'm going to say something, and I don't mean to sound arrogant, but I'm going to say it anyway. When it comes to anti-Semitism, we're the ones who get to define it. Okay, I have been told by others outside of our community what they think anti-Semitism is or should be. Okay, that's like telling a black person what racism is or what the Confederate flag should mean to them, right? We get to define it. Now, we may not agree within our own community exactly, and there's different definitions, that's true, but we call it Jewsplaining. I mean, don't tell me that a phrase like river to the sea, okay, which means to us, most of us, the extermination of not just the state of Israel, but the people of Israel, okay? And I was told by a professor, no, it's not. A white Christian professor, no, it's, no, it's not. Yes, it is. When you ask the majority of my community, yes, it is, okay? So we have adopted a definition that is the most popular definition of anti-Semitism in the world. 40 countries have adopted it, most of Western Europe. Okay, the United States uses this definition. It's called the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. The United States State Department and Department of Education have used this definition, at least as it's not codified into law, but it's used as guidelines, right? So some of what you'll see some of the examples in a moment. Some of them are that gray area that you may or may not agree with, okay? But what it makes clear, again, is that legitimate criticism of Israel is not anti-Semitism. It says that over and over again. But it gives these examples, and I want to show you. So, number one, fill in the blank, Jews control. We control the banks, we control government, we control foreign policy, we control Hollywood. Okay, that's what Kanye says. We control Hollywood. You know why there are so many Jews? There's no question that Jews are disproportionately represented in Hollywood. Do you know why? Anyone know why? Say? We're funny. We're not as funny as this guy. He's no. Creative. No, it was an industry that allowed Jews when there was anti-Semitism everywhere else that didn't allow. I mean, my father wanted to go to be possibly a dentist. He couldn't get into dental school because there was a quota for Jews, okay, right? So that's why there are so many Jews represented in Hollywood. Okay, denying the Holocaust. That should be obvious. But there's also what's called Holocaust distortion or minimization. Oh, yeah, there were some Jews killed, but there were a lot of people killed during World War II. Or like Poland, what they're trying to do, when they talk about those who died, they don't mention that 6 million of them were Jews, right? It's just that several million people were murdered during the Holocaust, okay? But it's more than that. We saw comparisons during COVID, for example, from a Clackamas County commissioner who made the comparison between the COVID mask and vaccine mandates and the measures that the Nazis used to commit genocide against the Jews. We've seen anti-vaxxers, those who come to Salem to protest against some legislation wearing the yellow Star of David that Jews were forced to wear during the Holocaust, right? That is anti-Semitism. We had a prominent religious leader who compared abortion to the murder of 6 million Jews during the Holocaust. Now, in his case, we met with him and we educated him and he listened and then he apologized publicly in our Jewish newspaper. So what he said was anti-Semitic in our minds, but that didn't mean he was an anti-Semite, right? So that sort of Holocaust distortion we see all too often. And now, as you saw earlier when Rachel was talking, some of those more prominent Holocaust deniers are out in the open, out of the shadows of society, and they are being normalized. So now, dual loyalty, okay? Yes, most Jews care about the people of Israel, about the state of Israel. Again, staying away from whether they support the government of Israel. That's not what we're talking about. But we, as Zionists, we identify, we have, in fact, the most recent comprehensive study of American Jews showed that 80% believe that Israel is either essential or somewhat essential to their Jewish identity. 80%. In a more recent survey showed that only 7% of American Jews are anti-Zionist. So think about that. So yes, we have a connection to the state of Israel. No question about it. But that doesn't mean we're more loyal to the state of Israel than we are to the United States, the country we live in. But that charge has been made at the highest levels of our government. I'll come back to the next one. The blood libel. The blood libel is a term that came out of the Middle Ages when a Jewish community was accused of killing Christian children and using their blood to make our Passover matzah. Okay? That's where the term came from. Today, the notion that Jews have killed Jesus. I think Candace Owens has said that over and over again. So you still hear it. My oldest son, 6th grade teacher, also made that comment until my wife and I corrected him. You don't hear it, thankfully, very often anymore.
You saw it a few years ago a lot with QAnon, which is kind of, that was a big thing with
crazy
QAnon.
Conspiracy theory that had anti-Semitic undertones. But accusing American Jews of being complicit in genocide, that's a blood libel, okay? And that's anti-Semitic. Okay, just because we're Jewish doesn't mean we're responsible for the actions of the Israeli government. Whether we support it or not support it doesn't matter. And we've seen how that's played out in the murder of 2 Jews in Washington, D.C., and 1 in Boulder. Okay, so it can incite people to violence.
And in Australia at Bondi Beach.
And in Australia, yes. Drawing comparisons of Israelis to Nazis, that's a big trigger for us to be called, for anyone in our community to be called Nazis. Whatever you think of, again, of the Israeli military, but to refer to us as Nazis, I can tell you, we had a congresswoman who recently made a statement on the House floor. She had gone to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, and then she went onto the House floor after she toured the museum, and she compared what was happening in Gaza to the Holocaust, and was there an outcry from our community. And she apologized for using, in her words, very poor judgment. Okay? So that's a trigger. And then finally, denying the Jewish people the right of our right of self-determination by declaring that the existence of the state of Israel is a racist endeavor. In other words, by referring to Zionism as racism, this was right out of the old Soviet Union, that managed to get a resolution passed in the United Nations in 1975 declaring Zionism as racism. It took 16 years for it to be repealed. But there were still countries that voted to keep it. Right? So the notion that Zionism, again, part of Jewish identity, is racism, if you ask me, that's anti-Semitism. So these are some of the examples that this definition uses as a guideline to determine whether a situation is anti-Semitic or not. Okay? So with that...
Well, I just want to quickly... How does this play out into our everyday lives? I want to talk about what it means to our organizations. After Bondi Beach, we had Hanukkah celebrations throughout our community. We have so many armed guards and a police presence, and we have to, our preschools, our synagogues, our organizations all have guards and our hardened infrastructures because of the fear of what could happen and of what has happened. So just the real lived experience of our community now.
In fact, our organization spent last year $1.2 million on security alone, which we would obviously rather spend that money on more important things. I mean, well, it's important, on different things, I should say, yes. On whether it's social services or education, what have you. So with that, we've got plenty of time for questions. So I guess what we'll do is you're going to take this. Oh, you have two of them. Oh, okay.
You'll have to go to...
Come join me. Please don't trip.
Hi. Over here.
Perfect.
I'm not confused, but the problem seems that I don't know what to say, when to say it, because the definition of your being is Zion, our state, Israel. And then the government of Israel says, Zionism is what we want. We need to remove the Palestinians and take the West Bank. I'm not talking Gaza, West Bank. So to me, it's a conundrum that I can't say unless I give a big paragraph that I do not feel that the land and towns and people that are trying to make a living, their trees are being chopped down, villages being destroyed by settlers, that I can't say that because it's very confusing.
You can say that. Well, I'm not going to call you an anti-Semite. That's what I said. We have Israelis who are critical of or protesting against their own government for various reasons, right? So I haven't talked about my views about what's happening in the West Bank, and maybe we actually would agree on a lot. So I always tell people, for me, it's so how do I do it? I compartmentalize, just like I compartmentalize here in this country, because right now I'm afraid for our democracy based on what's happening at the federal level. Doesn't mean I don't love America, right? So, just because you're critical of this or that Israeli policy or this or that Israeli government doesn't make you anti-Semitic. And you can say it, like I said, Jews in Israel are constantly criticizing their own government. It doesn't mean they're anti-Semitic, of course not. So that's how I approach it, is compartmentalizing. You know, look, I mean, I will just tell you, just personally speaking, if I were Israeli, I would not be voting for the current coalition or for Netanyahu. That's just me, okay? But I still love Israel and I still support the people of Israel. And that's how I go about it. If someone wants to label me as an anti-Israel person because I say that, then, you know, then there's no hope for that person. Did I say anything?
I mean, I'm just going to agree. I actually am Israeli. I spent 4 years living in Israel and have citizenship, and was there in May, and in my personal capacity was at the protests.
So I wanted to say a couple of things. First thing is that I have no problem sharing my personal views about what's happening. And I guess I'm an anti-Zionist because I abhor what's happening. The right wing in Israel is becoming almost fascist, and the Israelis are demonstrating all the time against that government. And so I don't know, the question to you, I have one more thing to say, but the question to you would be, how come that movement, those demonstrations of tens of thousands of Israelis don't show up in the media, don't show up on the front page of the New York Times?
But before, we controlled the media.
Right, and we control the media. So before we get to that, I also want to say.
Well, let me just respond to that. And I don't,
Okay.
again, I don't want to get into the conflict. I mean, I don't think that makes you an anti-Zionist. It means you're opposed to the current Israeli government. Okay, if you believe in the right of the Jewish people to self-determination in our ancestral homeland, then you are a Zionist. That's what it means. So it's, again, I know there's a lot of confusion about the term, and unfortunately a lot of younger Jews believe that that's what it means, but it's not what it means. So unfortunately the word has been corrupted. But in terms of, look, there's a lot that you don't know unless you follow the Israeli media about what's really going on in Gaza. I mean, let's be honest, and again, I want to, you know, I'm not going to talk about whether I agree with what is the IDF did. A lot of what we see coming out of Gaza is from Al Jazeera, okay? That's a Hamas mouthpiece. So we have to be careful about what we think we know about the conflict, or, you know, if we cherry pick what this government minister said versus that government minister. The case against genocide against Israel is by cherry picking what certain ministers have said, which, again, I wouldn't vote for this coalition, but we have to be careful about what we think we know about what's actually happening in Israel and Gaza. And that's all I'm going to say.
I just want to add that being Zionist does not negate also believing in the potential and possibility of a two-state solution where both communities can live safely and freely in their homelands. So there is a two-state solution even today. It'll take a while to get there, but it is still possible.
And we need good leadership on both sides to make it happen.
Just one more thing. Today I'm wearing, so in the comments about being afraid, I am afraid because I'm a Jew and I'm an Israeli. Grew up there, born there. I am afraid. I have a necklace with the Star of David. I don't wear it. In cabs that I take, or Ubers all over the country, when people ask me where I'm from and what my accent is, I don't say I'm Israeli. I'm afraid to say I'm Israeli because a lot of the cab drivers may be anti-Israeli. In the street, when I go to public places, unless I feel safe, as I do here, I don't say I'm Israeli because I'm afraid that I'll be attacked or be spoken to in a manner that will be very hard for me. So I think, to your example, you know, I'm a pretty successful person. I have a good life. But when it comes, and today I wore one of my Israeli necklaces because I thought that was a good idea. What it says is love in Hebrew. So it doesn't even have to be a Star of David. There are other ways that kind of identify you as a Jew. But in this case, I wasn't afraid.
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Mark. The political structure of theocracy is kind of at the heart of Zionism, I believe, just like it's at the heart of many countries that have a stan at the end of their name. And even our country here in America is rapidly moving towards this Christian nationalist identity. How much of the anti-Semitism do you feel is connected to this political philosophy of theocracy? Religion running the government, running the country.
Wow. How long do you have? Well, first of all, Israel's not a theocracy. I just want to be clear. It's a democracy, and whether you hate this government or not, it's a democratically elected government. And for many of us, we hope that in the election that's coming up soon, it's going to be removed from power. Yes. But so as far as Christian nationalism is concerned, yes, we're very concerned about the growing threat of Christian nationalism. I mean, we have politicians in Congress who believe and have said publicly that the United States is a Christian nation. I think our vice president may have been saying that. And so we always look at each other and other minorities that are non-Christian, our Hindu friends or Muslim partners, whatever, and ask, well, where does that leave us, right? And my concern is more about the assault on democracy. And when you couple the assault on democracy with an economy that's struggling, then we have those who are looking for scapegoats, whether that's out of Christian nationalism or whoever. And typically the first scapegoat they're going to look for is us. So, but yes, it's absolutely on the rise, and it's a threat to our democratic way of life and our pluralistic way of life.
I'll just remind everybody there's a primary coming up in May. Vote. Don't care who you vote for, just vote.
Yes, my name's Anita Owen. I appreciate your sharing your history and what is happening. However, I have not seen you take enough responsibility for the killing of 75,000 Gazans and the destruction of the West Bank and the living space of the people there. And I had up until recently signs in my yard about stopping the killing in Gaza, and that the U.S. and the Israel are totally responsible for this killing. And I believe, and I'm a citizen who feels a sense of responsibility here in the U.S. for sending all those bombs to Israel that killed the Gazans. So I feel equally responsible. But I'm not seeing you guys taking enough responsibility. I'm taking responsibility, but when I talk to Jewish people, they're not, even to my senator, he is not really taking responsibility for this terrible behavior.
Okay, is there a question? Because
and the question is...
Just so you know, okay, we're not here to talk about the conflict, okay? And I'm not responsible for what's happening in Gaza as an American Jew, and what you're insinuating is very troublesome, that I am responsible for what's happening there. And your notion of how many are killed and who's been killed, that we can debate on offline, because your information is not accurate. Okay.
I believe my information is accurate.
That's fine, but do you have a question?
And also the
what is your question?
International Court of Justice has said it is genocide.
Actually, they haven't, but that's another inaccuracy.
Okay. Hi, I'm Lisa. And I like to hear all different, viewpoints. And personally, I grew up pretty religiously Jewish. And the thing is that, I grew up believing that Israel could do no wrong, that Israel built up, a desert. And it was only when I was 50 that I met with, a Palestinian woman who was in the same field as I was. And I realized that, there's more than one side to the story. And I, believe that there is a possibility for even a one-state solution that doesn't claim Judaism as the primary, religion in the state of Israel, and that there are equal rights for all citizens of Israel.
Okay, again, I know that you want to try to drag us into talking about the conflict. That's not what we're talking about.
Yeah, this is John. I had a question about the origins of anti-Semitism. In my experience, when I think of the Jewish community or Jews as an ethnic group, it's kind of, in my mind, a Horatio Alger success story. I mean, you alluded to the entertainment industry, but there's also law, medicine, music, business, and especially academia, where once the quotas were taken away, once the restrictions were removed, Jews have just, they occupy the heights in those particular fields especially. And why did this come about? I think it's because the culture, the emphasis on education, the emphasis on deferment of gratification, you work hard, you're successful, you have the support of your family, parents sacrificing for their kids. And I'm wondering the possible source of anti-Semitism in society if other people, especially people who didn't work very hard, maybe they didn't study in high school and they didn't go to college, or they partied in college or whatever and haven't been near as successful, if they look around and they see Jews who are very successful, and of course, they can't say, I'm not as successful because I didn't work as hard. There has to be a conspiracy there. There's got to be something going on. Why are Jews so prominently successful in these fields? So do you think that might be one source of anti-Semitism? Jealousy?
There is potentially, but I think what I'm going to say is when Jews moved to America, there was a differentiation in immigration. So if you look at immigration status and it says where people came from, Jews actually say Hebrew or Jew instead of their country of origin. But once they got here, there was a differentiation between the peoplehood, and it became only in the last American times where we've been disconnected from a peoplehood and identified more as a religious community. And so that changed the perception. And it's not exactly answering your question. I don't know if there is an exact answer to your question, but I just want to talk about the difference between what is still happening in Europe, where many are still seen as a people and an ethnic identity in other countries, whereas in America, where there is a disconnection, broadly speaking, and you can think of the term of the melting pot. Where people were brought to America and much more assimilated into culture as opposed to keeping their identifiable pieces.
Well, I would say you're right in the sense that Jews throughout the generations have always emphasized education, right? So that's why we ended up in maybe disproportionately represented in some of the professions that you mentioned. Is there jealousy? Sure. Do you think there was a rise in racism when President Obama became president because, there were those in the white middle class or lower classes that looked at someone who they thought was beneath them and managed to rise to the highest level of office in our country? Yes. So is jealousy a part of it? Sure. But if you want to go way back historically, it really started with the church. And the church, it was all about the fact that Jews were stubborn enough to refuse to accept Jesus as our Savior, as the Son of God. And that's how it really began and for centuries, it was really more focused on religion than, say, on race or other things. But we're typically, as I mentioned, scapegoated for many different reasons. And when economies have struggled, I mean, look at Nazi Germany. Who was to blame? The Jews, okay? The insinuation that American Jews are responsible for what's happening in Gaza, it's a type of scapegoating, and it's offensive.
Okay, there's time for one short question.
One short question.
Hi, my name's Michelle, and I want to thank you tremendously for coming today and educating us on anti-Jewish hate and bias and the ugliness that you live through. I have an observation and a question. Okay, my question is I believe, and do you agree, that all forms of hate are the problem, and we must stand our ground to oppose that? And if I may just say, Salem activists protesting in the streets of Salem weekly, we are seeing increasing signs that we are threatening the white ethno-state of America and white supremacy that you mentioned. I have seen an evolution of people saying the FU, doing the fingers, and to a rise of people doing the Nazi salute. Thank you.
Yes, I mean, we are concerned about all forms of hate, and as I mentioned in the beginning, we think they're related, and we say, maybe Jews are the canary in the coal mine, okay, but if it starts with us, it won't end with us, and if it starts somewhere else, it'll eventually get to us, and we have to stand in solidarity against that sort of hatred, absolutely 100%. One more thing I just want to mention is we didn't really talk about it, and I want you to pay attention now. There are bills before Congress that are trying to regulate some of these social media platforms that are not just allowing for hateful speech, but they're actually allowing for the sale of hateful, racist, and anti-Semitic merchandise that have algorithms that are amplifying hate, that bring more and more viewers and readers to their platforms, which then gives these organizations more profit. We really need to pay attention to that, because part of the reason why anti-Semitism has exploded over the last 20 years is because of the internet. So pay attention to that, because we need to support those bills that, while respecting free speech, but also regulate and provide for the moderation of content, especially hateful content, regardless of who it's directed against.
Again, vote.
Again, vote, yes. So I wanted to really thank both of you for coming here today. Even as a Jew, I learned things I didn't know. So I thought that was really good. And so on behalf of all of us, thank you, and thank you for sharing this with us.
Thank you for the opportunity. Yeah.